the recording. We're set to go. All right, so let's then go now to the cyber campus, smart attendance, and let me open that up. And first go to www.cuk.ac.kr, and then we go to English, and then we go to cyber campus, and then we go to login. Yeah, go to English again. We go to login, and we go to login. Okay, and DENDEDOMINICIS. And put in my secret password, and like this. And make sure that you can share the screen. And so we go here, and so I want you to always see what I'm doing. So let me open that up. And so we can see here the methodology, and your smart attendance number here in week 12 is through 412. 412 is your smart attendance number. So we go to chatting, put in 412, 412 like that. Okay, so that's your smart attendance number. And let's we have a debate coming up. So let me again remind you of that. Or let's go here and go to my Google Drive and open that up. Yeah, what's going on? And what the heck is it doing now? Okay, so like this. And so I think, again, make sure you can see what I'm doing. So methodology, and go here so that you can see methodology. And here it is. And you can see that we have a debate for Dayak 1 will go against me on Friday on the debate topic. To South Koreans, quantitative research is generally more persuasive than qualitative research. So however you conceive of or understand persuasive to mean, in terms of what does persuasion mean, it's more persuasive than quantitative research. Of course, it was meant to be provocative, and so I'm going to be pro. So I'm going to argue that quantitative research is generally more persuasive, but I'll try to do that in a way that will get you to vote for me, so that I will be victorious in the debate, and I will set up the debate voting for Friday's class. And of course, if you haven't signed up for a debate topic, you might want to do that. So Katika has, and E.G. Young have, and so if anybody else has yet to do that, they have a few more opportunities, but not many more left. Okay, so let's go then to the lesson plan for my class, and go to methodology and open up the what did I have put down on the method on the lesson plan, because it's important for me to remind myself what I want to talk about. And so we go here to your paragraphs, of course, are due on Thursday, and to prepare for the debate. And there's nothing really much that I have time to show you. These are some interesting YouTube videos on sociological research and methods and concepts, and also in epistemological notions that are interesting and useful, that typically, if I were starting this class first thing at 9 o'clock in the morning, there might be a few minutes before the start of the 9 o'clock class that I could show you some of these video clips, but you're welcome to look at them if you're interested in them. But something did come up interesting in the news report, and I just when we covered an earlier report about how tattooing is becoming more popular among Japanese, and I thought, I don't think I see tattoos in Korea. But then yesterday, when I went to my doctor's appointment at the Seoul St. Mary's Hospital, I did see somebody, a man in a suit with a tattoo on his neck. So maybe they're more common than I realize, now that we've been talking about tattoos. And then what did I see in the New York Times? Indeed, after covering Japan and tattooing in Japan, here is an article in the New York Times on tattoos in Korea that are still illegal. It's illegal. But I saw this man wearing a suit in Yokok Station with a tattoo. Sounds like a topic for qualitative research. So here's the article, and it goes on. And again, by the way, I should tell you that this Seoul bureau for the New York Times evidently is a 24/7 operation. So like, for example, there's been much reporting in the news about how the upcoming United States Supreme Court judgment is likely to be to overturn the legal access to abortion as national law, a constitutional right, in other words, national law in the United States, and leave it to the 50 states, each state government in the 50 states to determine whether or not abortion, to end a pregnancy for women will be legal or not in each of those 50 states. And this has been the biggest news event since the start of since the start of the Ukraine war, when Russia invaded at the end of February. And the impact it will have on American politics is questionable. But they did have a report in the New York Times about how the Seoul bureau of the New York Times was the only one open when this was leaked, because it was, of course, nighttime in the United States when the leak of the upcoming Supreme Court opinion overturning Roe versus Wade, the 1973 court case of Roe versus Wade that made abortion legal, is likely to be overturned next month in June by a new Supreme Court decision. And the draft opinion that always accompanies these U.S. courts rulings was leaked to the press overnight. And the New York Times had to respond. And they relied upon the New York Times Seoul bureau to be the one to coordinate the New York Times response to this leak, to get it prepared and get it issued and uploaded on the New York Times website. And Politico was the internet news source that got it first, but everybody else had to respond as well. And so they had a New York Times report about how the Seoul bureau of the New York Times was the one that had to deal with this scoop, this breaking news. So the point is that this Seoul bureau of the New York Times is important for the New York Times development strategy. So this report that came out, just a few days ago, it says how Apro Lee, a tattoo artist with a client at a studio in a city. That's the description of the tattoo picture there. The tattoo artists, long treated as criminals for their work, say that it's time to end the stigma against their business, which has thrived underground. Seoul, South Korea, in a serene, plant-filled studio paneled with large windows, Kim Do-yoon gives tattoos to clients who visit him in South Korea from around the world for his fine line work. A diaphanous octopus with its tentacles unfurled, a delicate wildflower sweeping over a forearm, a portrait of a beloved pet to last forever. Kim, known as Doi, is a favorite of celebrities, including actor Brad Pitt and actress Hans Yesul, but he works discreetly. There is no sign advertising his studio, nestled in a nondescript building in north central Seoul, near a palace that dates back to the 14th century. Is that that's the famous palace, right? He screens customers carefully, rolls the blinds down during appointments, and moves his shop about every 2 years. In South Korea, his art is a crime. Under a ruling that has been in place since 1992, tattooing without a medical license can result in fines of up to $40,000 or even imprisonment. Opponents of decorative tattoos have invoked concerns about long-standing associations with organized crime, as well as fears about inadequate hygiene and potential harm inflicted by tattoo artists who they say lack adequate skills. Attempts to overturn this ban have repeatedly failed. In March, the Constitutional Court, March of this year, in Seoul, reaffirmed the tattoo industry's illegality in a 5-4 ruling, close ruling, right? South Korean tattoo artists and customers believe that the ruling is at odds with reality, citing drastically changed social norms that have fostered a thriving underground industry, a greater openness and acceptance of tattoos, and rising international demand for what they know as K-tattoos. While tattoos have grown in acceptance in most parts of this world, exceptions include several Islamic countries, South Korea remains one of the few where the artists are treated as criminals. Tens of thousands of them work in secret here under constant threat of exposure to law enforcement, or working covertly under the ban. Kim, 41, said, "It's been so long, it's almost funny." So-yoon Lim, a 38-year-old tattoo artist trainee in Seoul, said that the medical license requirement didn't make any sense. No one's trying to go to medical school to become a tattoo artist, she said. And so it goes on here, hidden in plain sight. Tattoo artists say that the industry in Korea has exploded over the past decade. In Seoul, it is hidden in plain sight. Tattoo artists tend to rent upper floor office spaces across the city, especially Hongdae, an art-centered neighborhood. It's easy to find artists as long as you know where to search. Instagram. There's so many amazing artists in Korea, and social media allows you to pick through them, and they're easy to access, them said. Social media has also spread trends like K-tattoo, a term describing the detailed illustration-inspired tattoos that have become synonymous with Korean artists. The K-tattoo has created a new surge of customers, Kim said. Top stars in South Korea include Jungkook of the K-pop boy band BTS, rapper Jay Park, and singer Hyunhae have made tattoos more visible by displaying them when possible, helping to cultivate a youth culture more enamored of them. Park's first tattoo, which he got a decade ago, was an homage to his breakdancing crew. He has since lost count of the number of tattoos he has gotten. He said, it was a shock to a lot of people at first, Park 35 said, but as time went on and my career started to progress, I started to win people over despite my tattoos, and they started thinking it was cool. But he said there were some brands that likely viewed this tattoo as liability, and that he, along with other stars, had to cover them when appearing on Korean TV. Last June, a Gallup poll surveying more than 1,000 South Korean adults found that more than half favored legalization. The results reflected a clear generation gap. 81% of respondents in their 20s were in support, compared with 60% for those in their 40s. And it goes on here. A centuries-old stigma. The oldest recorded tattoos belong to a European man now nicknamed Otzi, who lived 5,300 years ago. Researchers say this is they found a frozen mummy. Do you know who this is? It was a frozen mummy of a dead man who died 5,300 years ago, frozen in the ice, in the glaciers, in the ice and the mountains between Austria and Italy. And that was 30 years ago, in the early 1990s. The ice has been melting, and they found his body, and his body's incredibly well preserved. And he has tattoos. So they nicknamed him Otzi. This man who's still, of course, being studied. They have found, he died a violent death. He was not Otzi had enemies. They found the blood of 4 different people on top of him, on his skin and on his clothes. The blood of 4 different people. And somebody had put an arrow in him from 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters away, put an arrow in him, hit him here, and he collapsed and eventually died, because the arrow point is still there. And then he was covered over with snow and ice. So Otzi died a violent death. They found that ancient cultures used tattoos for varying purposes: decoration, protection, and punishment. In South Korea, tattoos, also called munshin, have long had negative associations. During the Kyoryo dynasty, which ruled from AD 9, or you're supposed to say current era, not animus domini. That's Latin for in the year of our Lord. You can say that in Catholic University of Korea, but you're supposed to say CE, current common era. That's politically incorrect. Somebody should tell the Seoul bureau chief in New York Times, you're not supposed to use religious Christian terminology. So in the last 30 or 40 years, we've been saying before current era and current era. So current era 918 to 1392, people were forcibly given tattoos on their faces or arms, listing the crimes they had committed or marking them as slaves. This punishment, the step before the death penalty, left tattooed people as outcasts living on the fringes of society, and it was eliminated in 1740. In the 20th century, tattoos were adopted by gangs inspired by Japanese customs, viewing body ink as a physical emblem of criminality. Several modern tattoo artists in South Korea said they had deliberately moved away from menacing images like dragons and Japanese imagery, often requested by gangsters. San Yi, who works in Seoul near Apgujeong Rodeo, an area known for trendy stores, said that she intended to show that tattoos weren't just relegated to certain types of people, but that they were fashionable. Customer requests often have also shifted, Kim said. When I started, people wanted tattoos to look braver. Now, he said, now they want beautiful things. A long campaign for legalization. Kim is the founder of a 650-member tattoo labor union that advocates rights of artists. Legalization would create safer, more sanitary environments for both customers and artists, he said. Tattoo artists often meet clients alone and trust strangers to keep their secret. Female artists are particularly vulnerable to sexual violence. In the past, the police have conducted sweeps rounding up artists, he said. Rival shops have been known to flag artists to the police. That's not very nice. Since what we're doing is illegal, we're in a blind spot, she said. Because of that, there are many people that are exploiting the situation. The number of tattoo artists has multiplied over the past decade, fueling competition for clients. April Lee, based in a city an hour north of Seoul, said she had traveled the world for most of her career because his bold work inspired by Korean folk art was more in demand abroad. The world is changing, Lee 40 said. Then why are we behind? Let's move. Others like Lee Dong-kyu, 37, have left Korea altogether. He goes by Q and is now based in Los Angeles. We are not wrong. Tattooing is not wrong, but it is illegal, and that feels awful, he said. I love my job. I am proud of myself, but I cannot open up. Here I feel free. Feel so much better for work, but at the same time, it's not my country. Sang Kyo, or Mr. K, one of the most sought after tattooed artists in the United States, who is known for his ultra detailed work, said bluntly that he would have never made it as far if he hadn't left Seoul. In America, it's different. They respect artists, Mr. Ko said, 41. Ryo Yu-jung, a member of the National Assembly in South Korea who helped introduce a bill last summer to legalize tattooing, said the Constitutional Court's narrow ruling to uphold the ban signaled change for an art industry that the world loves. Tattooing is a boon for the South Korean economy, Ryu said by email. She said she would keep pushing for legalization until the tide of public opinion shifted further. Customers are waiting too. Kim A-min, a 38-year-old teacher in Dongdukcheon, has tattoos that he says are intended to honor his values. One arm is covered with various masterpieces by Shakespeare. He's in the process of getting a back tattoo of Venus inspired by his wife. He seldom exposes tattoos, aware that others might not view his ink as art. I can't wait for the moment where people feel safe or free to show their tattoos and express their feelings through tattoos, he said. I am hopeful. So there you see, of course, the pictures of this person doing a tattoo on somebody here, and another picture of him. And here, this is a person in Seoul. He's willing to show his face. This person is getting a tattoo. It must hurt. And I guess that's the kind of work he does. That's pretty impressive. Anyway, so again, so this is supposed to be introduction to this week's readings. So let's say you're going to think about doing some kind of investigation on this topic about tattooing in Korea. And of course, I'll post this on the course website. And so imagine you are undertaking a research project focusing on CUK students about tattoos. And so you have to ask, what would be your central research question? What are your sub-questions? And then the third stage, what are your interview questions? So we'll come back to that because now this is what the topic of chapter 6 is that you're reading for this week. So let me open up chapter 6. And so we'll come back to that. I want you to think about what would be your central research question? What are your sub questions? Typically 5 to 7, right? And then what are your interview questions that derive from your sub questions? And keep that in mind that Cresswell and Poth write this book because they want to help some people like you and me doing research, qualitative research for the first time, not to be afraid of it, not to be intimidated by it, that it's a set of component stages. And so this chapter 6 is kind of mechanical and basic, but it's good because it's helping you think through what your research project should involve. And you, of course, you have a research project, and you are so let's go through chapter 6, the chapter 6 notes, and so they state in this reading that the most important part of a research project is the beginning. The purpose of the study should be clear. The research question should be precise. The research problem or issue should be clearly identified. The author of the research project should use transitions to bridge one section of the study to the other. The problem should lead to certain research questions. Then the data collection then naturally follows. Then the data analysis and interpretation relate closely to the questions. The questions in turn help the reader understand the research problem. The logic moves back and forth between these components in an integrated, consistent manner. So keep that in mind also, that you have to start with a research question, but you might modify and change your central research question. You will modify and change your central research question as you gather more data, and you actually do the interviewing and you do the researching, you're going to gather more data, and you're going to find that your research question, your fundamental central research question, has evolved and changed. And that means your sub-questions will evolve and change. So in this way, all parts of the research project clearly interrelate, interact as perceived by the reader of the project. So when the reader of the project is probably reading your thesis or reading a published journal article. When you read a published journal article, it's not typically written as a thesis, right? That when you do a research thesis, you have to be very explicit and direct about explaining what is your central research question, listing your sub questions, and in providing your interview questions. When you read articles like on Google Scholar or articles on ProQuest, they're not written the same way that your research thesis as a student, graduate student or undergraduate or PhD student is typically written. They're typically meant to present the findings of your research. They have word limits. Like I told you, I have word limits in what I write as well, and those word limits are important. So they're not going to provide what you read here. When you look for articles on tattoos in Korea or tattooing in Japan or international study abroad students coming to Korea and their experience, and you go to you go to Google Scholar or you go to ProQuest, you're going to find articles that do not follow this format. But you're still supposed to look for those articles. That's the theme, right? You're supposed to review the literature, what's been published already in your field, explain as you critique the literature, what is wrong with the literature or where it's weak. You have to convince your reader, persuade your reader that there's a weakness that you're trying to, and you've identified this weakness. You don't have chapter 6 on the reading? Did you on your reading for? Do you have the hard copy of the paper copy at DocuCopy? So chapter 6 in the DocuCopy.
I don't find it on Cyber Campus after chapter 5.
You mean you don't have a PDF file for the chapter?
Yeah, but just until the chapter 5.
Oh. Well, DocuCopy's got paper copy of it.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not in Korea.
Yeah. I mean, that was I try to the office. I mean, I'm not going to take the blame for this. The office is not, they have the same kind of problems we have, like we talked about in the European politics and society class, that it's really difficult to hire and fire people in Korea. So they have a lot of office turnover in our office here at the university because they're on temporary contracts. So okay, I'll work on it. I will try to get the PDF file of chapter 6 made. I posted these notes, and as I said, the paper copy is available, DocuCopy.
Yeah.
But to go on here, so the problem should lead to certain research questions. Those are your sub questions, right? And the data collection that naturally follows from those research questions. Then the data analysis and interpretation relate closely to the questions, and the questions in turn help the reader understand the research problem. The logic moves back and forth between these components in an integrated, consistent manner. So in this way, all parts of the research project clearly interrelate and interact as perceived by the reader of the project. So the final product in the form of a publication looks nice and consistent and logical, but the research process itself is not nice and smooth and step by step. It's interesting, it's chaotic, it flows back and forth. So don't be intimidated when you read articles in English or Korean from scholarly sources that, oh my God, they look so logical and consistent and methodical in their presentation of their findings. That's the write-up. The write-up is in terms of producing a published article is different from the thesis in the research project itself. So the introduction in a clearly integrated research project begins with the identification of a clear problem that needs to be studied. And the study advances to the statement of the primary intent of the study in the form of a purpose statement. And it is the most important. It sets the stage for the entire article. It conveys what the author hopes to accomplish in the study. So again, in terms of what you hope to accomplish, including what you're trying to explain, you're going to need a theory, right? So like, for example, if you're going to talk about tattoos in Korea, what do you hope to accomplish by researching tattoos in Korea? And I think let's go on here because I got to be careful I don't mix things up. I think the question is, well, you'll see, there's some examples here. So, so interrelating the study problem, purpose, and questions within research. Demonstrating methodological congruence is important. It begins with a clear problem in need of investigation. It advances the primary purpose of the study. It specifies the questions that guide the study design. These decisions define the problem, purpose, and questions. They provide the foundation on which to base subsequent decisions. The researcher identifies a problem and creates a statement of the research problem. This research problem is focused into a primary study purpose. Secondly, the researcher then creates a research purpose statement. It's also called the study aim. It advances the primary study goal. The goal is operationalized by drafting specific research questions. The researcher uses these sub and central research questions to guide the study design. So there you see I added chapter 6 to the reading that this semester. That's why you don't have it, because I used this book in previous semesters, but we only read up to chapter 1 through 5. Then I added chapter 6, and we don't have the PDF file for it because they didn't make it. So so you start off with a research problem. You identify a particular issue or in need of investigation. Tattoos in Korea, and the tendency and the role of tattoos in Korea. Advance the major objective for beginning the study, to understand why more people are getting tattoos. And then research questions. So let's go on here. The research problem statement. And so, for example, here's for your own research project regarding, for example, international studies students. Perhaps the narrative project research problem statement for you is the following: the challenge of loneliness and homesickness among international students studying at CUK. And do Asian students have an easier time dealing with homesickness and loneliness than non-Asian students, because they're culturally more similar to Koreans than, say, Americans or Germans? Or so that might be the general research problem. You know, again, you're interested in making sure that students do okay here. You know, and it's an issue. I think I might have mentioned, I mean, one of their international students here, students here several years ago, one died. A student from France, they found her and she was dead. Other students get into trouble. Two gay students got into trouble here because of misunderstandings. There are other cases as well. I've seen students who come from, and I can tell they come from poor socioeconomic class backgrounds from the United States. Not all of them. Some of them come here, but I know at least two that they had, three that left. They couldn't stay for the entire semester. It was too difficult. I don't know if it's too difficult. They said that there was a family problem back home and they had to go back and deal with this family problem. And I don't know if that's what they said, but they tended to come from students that were like first generation college students. They're the first students in their families to go to college. And that's, so now I'm bringing issues of class, socioeconomic status. How can we help students, particularly students who do not come from globalizer backgrounds, who parents are not international business people who are used to traveling and who've already lived abroad. Maybe the first time they've ever spent a lot of time outside of their home in the United States is to come here for a semester. How can we make at least complete the project rather than go home early? I mean, these are all valid. I mean, like that's the point made in doing qualitative research. There's typically problems we want to fix. We somehow want to improve the situation in doing qualitative research. All good research begins with an issue or problem that needs to be resolved. That's what I meant, right? Qualitative studies begin with an introduction that advances the research problem or the issue in a study. It is the stated need for the study or creating a rationale for the need for the study. And the introduction explains what are the gaps in the scholarly literature and how our study will fill in those gaps. They also give voice to unrepresented groups. So yeah, the introduction explains what are the gaps in the scholarly literature, which means you have to review the scholarly literature. You have to do keyword searches. Like I think, I showed you keyword searches before, right? And just to show you on Google Scholar, because that's the easiest to show right now, but typically other databases are kind of useful. So keyword searches, what would be put in phrases here? Study abroad. That's typically how it's described in American English. Study abroad program. And then you can put a little asterisk, which means programs and program and so on. International, first generation college students, asterisk, and let's see what comes up. What, 15,400 results. Oh, look at that. First generation students abroad. So first generation college students who are studying, Americans who are studying abroad. So you can tell, hey, there's other people concerned about this topic who are doing research on it. Like it's really important, right? Look at that. It just come up, first generation, like, wow. And so this is the University of Chicago, study abroad. First generation students, along with students from a diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, may be in a unique position to justify study abroad because they are already forging new paths for themselves in college and navigating unfamiliar environments and systems because they're first generation. They can't rely on their parents to tell them what college is like, to get them oriented towards college success. So, wow. I mean, I never did this before. This is the first time I've gone to Google Scholar and typed in those keywords. It's like, all this. 12 programs that offer first generation minority study abroad. Wow. Like we know it's more difficult for first generation college students, not to mention first to study abroad, not to mention the first generation to go to college. Wow. Look at all of this. I mean, I'm surprised. I didn't know this when I so obviously it's an important topic. And of course, universities have an incentive because, universities like to try to bring in more students. So of course, that's a big focus of Catholic University Korea. Catholic University Korea wants more international students to study here. And the biggest source has been China, of course, but that's not going to be the only source. And, we need more from other places as well. And if they come here, you want them to succeed, because if they succeed and then they go back, they'll encourage other people from India or Indonesia, or whomever, also come here and study. Back to the notes here. So then we gotta make sure I'm on the right. Okay, so yeah. So they also give voice to underrepresented groups like first generation college students. They also probe a deep understanding of an important phenomenon. The outcomes of the study may lead to specific outcomes, for example, such as stories, the essence of the phenomenon, that's a narrative. That's a narrative research, which is what you're doing. So thinking about telling the story of these two students that you are interviewing in terms of what brought them to Korea and how they've been dealing with Korea, while studying here, right? The essence of a phenomenon is phenomenology. The generation of a theory, that's grounded theory. The cultural life of and ethnography, obviously, and the in-depth analysis of a case, that's a case study. The components of a good introduction. Advance the topic or general subject matter of the research study by creating great reader interest in a few beginning sentences or a paragraph. Like, you know, we have to do more to encourage international student success. We want students, if they come here, to stay. I mean, maybe these students did have family problems. I don't know, but that's what they told me. Discuss the research problem or issue that leads to a need for the study. In other words, explain to the reader why the topic you wish to study is important. So, you know, we've just been doing that here for the last 15 minutes, right? Though these research problems can be found in personal experiences with an issue or a job-related problem, an advisor's research agenda for which the student is being employed, or in the scholarly literature, or in a mix of these sources, right? So your own personal life, your professor's project that you're working with your professor on, he might give you a task or she may give you a task. So that's the advisor's research agenda, which is, I think, is more common in Korea, right? Or through researching the scholarly literature, summarize the scholarly literature. You're not going to read all of it. You can't. I don't care. Nobody can read everything that's been published, but you're going to select important scholarly literature, and the more recent, the better. I mean, when you do it, I don't know. I guess if for an undergraduate project, it's something different, but for a PhD student, ideally, you want to focus on the scholarly literature published in the last 5 years, except for groundbreaking foundational scholarly research like citing Max Weber or Karl Marx. But ideally, you want to emphasize literature that's been published. So what is today, 2022? What's been published since 2017 onward? Point to deficiencies in evidence using the current literature or discussion. So that's where you point, that's where you critique the literature. You say, this literature doesn't do this adequately. And you're supposed to be creative in doing that. You're supposed to explain to the reader why there's a problem in the literature you're going to fill with your research. Indicate the reasons for these deficiencies, such as inadequate methods of data collection, or the need for research, or the existing research is inadequate. The justifications for the type of qualitative research project, such as narrative study, can be incorporated here. So, for example, for a narrative study, more knowledge of personal experiences are necessary. So, you need to get to know that person that you're doing for the narrative study. If you're telling the life story of that person, you're supposed to know something about that person, like their life background as they understand it. 5, argue for the importance for audiences. Argue importance of the study for audiences. These audiences or stakeholders may be other researchers, students, policymakers, and practitioners in the field, or institutions like Catholic University of Korea. And then they give you the template for the purpose statement. The purpose statement. The purpose statement. The purpose statement provides the major objective or intent or roadmap to the study. It is the most important statement in an entire qualitative study. It needs to be carefully constructed and written in clear and concise language. So the purpose of this narrative, so what goes here for your work that you're doing in your research project? What from these words, which one of these phrases goes here in this blank? Anyone? Yes, narrative. Thank you, Deok. Narrative. The purpose of this narrative study is to understand, describe, develop, discover. You pick one. And it says here, central phenomenon of the study. The experience of international study abroad students in South Korea. 4, Asian and non-Asian students, international students at Catholic University of Korea, or at Sungkyukwon University, or at Kookmin University, or at South Korean universities. You give them the name of the site. At this stage in the research, the experience of international study abroad students in South Korea will be, I think I messed that up, be generally defined as a general definition of the central phenomenon. We define, and that's important. A general definition of the central phenomenon will be generally defined as cultural adaptation, emotional well-being through cultural adaptation. This is a challenge, right? I mentioned before loneliness and homesickness. Like, how do you get people to stay here for the whole 6 months or 4 months and not say, I want to go back home. I want to go back home. So they're not going to admit to you that they're homesick. So yeah, if they like being here, like they're having a good time, that's going to make a difference in terms of them staying. And so what does it mean to have a good time? You have to have friends. Typically, if you're going to have a good time, you have a good time with other people. So it might well be understood. Is it easier for Asian students from outside of Korea to make friends than it is for European students or American students to make friends among Korean students here at South Korea? And I don't necessarily know the answer. I know people treat people differently in Korea depending on where they're from. I mean, the fact that I'm American, that gives me a lot of credit. I don't deserve. But because of the stereotypes of the United States, I get a lot of benefit of the doubt. I think, but I think students coming from other countries, like poor countries, might not get quite as much benefit of the doubt. But I could be wrong. That's why you do this research, right? So if you interview a student from India and a student from Japan studying in South Korea, is it easier for the student from Japan or India, or a student, again, we talked about non-Asian students, say a student from Africa? Is it easier for a student from Japan to make friends than a student is from Africa to make friends in South Korea? The above script can be used to encode a passage for a specific approach to qualitative research. The purpose of the writer of the purpose statement identifies the specific qualitative approach that the writer is using as the first statement. If it thereby foreshadows the inquiry's approach to data collection, analysis, and report writing. The writer of the purpose statement encodes the passage with words that indicate the reaction of the researcher and the focus of the approach to research. For example, particular words. I think that they give you a chart here. Yeah. So, and so this is, you can't really read this. This is too small, but I guess I can try to make it bigger. They give you an example, sample research problem. Yeah, advanced topic, exploring the conceptions and misconceptions of teen smoking in high schools. Discuss research problem. Tobacco use is a leading cause of cancer in American society. Boo, cancer, boo. Although smoking among adults has declined in recent years, it has actually increased for adolescents, teenagers. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported that smoking among high school students has risen from 27.5% in 1993 to 34.8% in 1991 to 95. Unless this trend is dramatically reversed, an estimated 5 million of our nation's children will ultimately die a premature death. Boo, premature death, boo. So this is a problem, right? And so they summarize the scholarly literature. They cite the literature. You know, you put those references for the complete reference information for the literature at the bottom of your paragraph or paper. That's why I keep asking you, you know, you cite the source, you put the in-text source citation, you have at the bottom of your paper the full reference. Minimal research, and then attempts point to deficiencies in the evidence. So what are the weaknesses or problems that are not sufficiently explored or researched after your critique of the scholarly literature, and then argue for the importance for the audience. And so what can school administrators, teachers, and parents learn to stop or reverse this increase in the frequency of smoking? So it goes on here to, for example, particular words encode the qualitative research, such as understand experiences, useful in narrative studies, describe, useful in case studies, ethnography, and phenomenologies, ascribe meaning associated with phenomenologies, develop or generate, useful in grounded theory, and discover. So those are the kind of words you will use. So you're doing a narrative study. So you want to understand the experiences of international students studying in South Korea. The researcher includes the above words in the purpose statement to encode the purpose statement for the qualitative approach that the researcher has chosen. Okay. The writer identifies the central phenomenon at the beginning of the study. The central phenomenon is the one central concept that the research study is exploring or examining. Examples in this book. So of course they have the several different appendices, right? With each research example, project example. One of them is the relational practice of a teacher who negotiates educational relationships with students having history of school failure. I mean, and we talked about the significance, the broader significance of that, given that so many teachers have these big dreams of, I want to be a teacher. I want to uplift the students. They go to college to get their teaching degree, and then half of them leave teaching after 5 years because they hate it. They become sad. They become frustrated. They're not having the impact they wanted to. I mean, I could tell you all sorts of stories. And what's funny, often not funny, it's tragic, but like people say that have told me that when they've done research on this topic, interviewing teachers, they've actually, by accident, caused some teachers to quit because the teacher finally realized just how futile and how unpleasant their job is because somebody asked them to think about what they're doing. So this person is a teacher who's specifically assigned to work with students. And that's what I mean. The student, they're not able to inspire the students. The students don't like being in the classroom. The teacher cannot get to the student. They're frustrated. The students they're out of control. You can't control them. They will not behave. They will not focus. And this person, and those students fail, right? For whatever the reasons for their behavior, they fail. So this is a teacher who's a specialist in dealing with those kinds of students. This person is a valuable resource. How does this person do that? How were they successful? What can we learn from them? And then they go on the behaviors, for example, of a culture sharing group that is British-born working class Pakistani and Bangladeshi young Muslim men. As the researcher gains experience in the field, the researcher may include comparisons of groups and analysis of linkages that after initial exploration of the central phenomenon. And then the writer researcher foreshadows the participants in the site for the study. So you can expand this point. You can expand your knowledge as you. This is an interesting statement because it highlights that, you're just getting started in this field. So as you become more of an expert, it's going to shape and develop your research projects and themes and questions. But, start off with a basic topic and then you can develop it and compare with other groups and analyses and linkages with other related mechanisms, causal factors that shape the environment as you become more of an expert. So the writer, that's the researcher, foreshadows the participants in the site for the study. They may be one individual, for example, a narrative or case study, in your case, 2 individuals, several individuals in phenomenology or grounded theory, a group, it's an ethnography, a site, such as an event, activity, program, or place in a case study. And Cresswell and Poth also suggest, well, let's go back a second here. So going back to the Japanese tattoo, Korean tattoo artists here. So how would you begin to research this topic about South Korean tattoos? and South Korean tattoo artists and South Korean people that get tattoos when it's still illegal to get a tattoo, have a tattoo in South Korea, which is interesting, right? It's illegal. So what kind of study do you think you might do? So let me ask you then to divide up into groups and fill out this script to begin to think about what kind of study, qualitative research project study would you begin to put together to think about or begin to think about investigating South Korean tattoo culture or South Korean tattoo cultures and ethnography, South Korean experience with tattoos, a phenomenology, individual story about how somebody gets a tattoo that other people can see. Like this guy, I saw him yesterday when I was at Onsu, transferring from Onsu to go to Yokok after getting off of the line 7 to get on the line 1. And this guy's walking, and he's a young guy. He was wearing a business suit, but I could tell it was a cheap business suit. It wasn't an expensive business suit. And he had a tattoo here on his neck. It was partly covered up, but I could see it. And so who are you going to study? The person that gets the tattoo artists, that one individual who has maybe a lot of tattoos that you know. If you do an individual person, that's a narrative. If you do a group, you're talking about a phenomenology. But what kind of group? The tattoo artists, the tattoo recipients, the CUK students. Are you interested in CUK students in particular? You can be. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you really interested about the impact of the Korean Catholic subculture. You know, this used to be a women's university just for women until the mid-1990s, and it's a Catholic university. So it has a tradition of being somewhat conservative, right? Hello. Hi, Phil. I'm teaching right now. Oh, yes. Okay. I will send text message to you. Okay. Thank you. Please, 28th of May, please come to Soman Cafe. Okay. Yes, Soman Church. Okay. At first, and then we can go the rest. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Nobody calls me. I don't have any friends in South Korea. The one people I know, they call me because I mean, nobody ever calls me in South Korea. So back to this. So you are all of these perspectives are important or useful. Like how would the university respond if they saw a CUK student openly showing their tattoos? Would they get in trouble here? Would the university respond? So I'm not saying it's a right or wrong answer, but I'm saying that these are the kind of questions that you might think about. You might think about how you would do this kind of a project, right? That so yeah, so let me ask you to divide up into work groups. Let's see how this works here, since we have a number of people online and 2 people in class. So if I just divide you into work groups and randomly, and so maybe we can put you into, it better be 2 groups because I think there are 5 students in the class. So, and assign you randomly. Okay, so please join those groups. Kritika, Moon Sun Young, and Young Jun Shin, and Gloria and Daek Won in room 2. And fill in the script here. Fill in the script here for thinking about a study that you might want to do for tattoos in South Korea. And if somebody wants to take the lead, like if somebody wants to be has an idea and the rest of the group accept it, that's fine too. Because as I said, there's a lot of different ways you could approach that topic, right? Let's see what the problem is here. I got Moon Sun Young should be in room 1, so I'll put in room 1 there. Okay. So Okay, so come up with very quickly, your groups come together and tell me how you would fill out the script to do a project on South Korean tattoos. And there's no right or wrong way. I just want you to do this. In fact, I'll pick a group leader and flip a coin to decide who's the group leader. And go back to the breakout rooms. And so heads, it's the person at the bottom of the list. And it's heads. So it is Young Jun Shin and Kwon Tae-ok will speak for room 2. So Young Jun Shin and Kwon Tae-ok. So help Young Jun Shin in room 1. Kritika and Moon Soon Young help Young Jun Shin in room 1. And Gloria help Kwon Tae-ok in room 2 to and fill in those questions, fill in those spaces in that script. You understand? Fill this out for a study on South Korean tattoos. So you have 1 minute. So Gloria, what kind of study would you want to do on South Korean tattoos? Oh, I don't know if people can hear me when they're in the groups. Maybe they can't hear me. No, they can't. Okay, thank you for reminding me. I think that somebody just reminded of that. So let me. So Kwon Tae-ok, please, talk to Gloria. And what is your name? Oh, Kritika. Oh, okay. So Kritika, you also prepare. What kind of topic would you like to prepare for South Korean tattoos? Okay. Okay, so who's going to speak first? Heads, the person, room 2 will speak first. And it's tails. So Young Jun Shin, how would you fill in the script to begin to think about doing a study on South Korean tattooing? Young Jun Shin? Young Jun Shin.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the purpose of this, what would you put here? What kind of study would you want to do? Would you want to interview one person, more than one person? Would you want to interview South Korean tattoo artists or South Korean tattoo recipients? There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just asking what you would prefer. Would you want to interview South Korean people that got tattoos, or would you want to interview South Korean artists who make the tattoos, who give the tattoos? There's no right or wrong answer. What's more interesting to you? Anyone want to help him?
Yeah. Sorry, sir.
Okay. So yes, Kritika. So you would do a phenomenological study. Yeah. So that means you're going to interview 5 to, what is it? 6 to 12 is the number, South Korean artists. And so in the study will be to understand, describe, or develop. Which do you prefer? Which of these words? Understand what is the central phenomenon of the study? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you know it's a crime what they're doing. So how do they justify that? How do they justify breaking the South Korea? I mean, I'm not saying this is all in the script, but it generates a lot of thought. Like, how do you justify doing something that you know is illegal? How do you justify to yourself and to whom? Who else knows that you're a South Korean tattoo artist? And there's precedent, right? Like until very recently, abortion was illegal in South Korea. But I also understand that abortion was quite common, but it's illegal. Well, it was. It's now the South Korean Constitutional Court just ruled not too long ago, like what, 2 years ago, that it cannot be illegal. But the government has not passed a law to make it, to adopt a legal framework to make it regulated. But like, what kind of person engages in activity in a way to make their life, understanding that they are doing something that's against the law? How do they justify that to themselves and to the rest of, and to their social circle? So, and the challenges for South Korean tattoo artists, tattoo artists at where, Seoul or outside of Seoul? Is there a significant difference between how Seoul and the rest of Korea? I mean, isn't Seoul the most cosmopolitan city? You know, would you find a tattoo artist like in Daegu or somewhere in Chola province? You probably could, but that's more provincial, right? That's more. So the site that you pick is important. You know, Seoul is on the cutting edge of K-pop. That's where everything happens that globally noticed in the world. At this stage in the research, the challenges confronting South Korean tattoo artists will be generally defined as, and this is a general definition of the central phenomenon, will be generally defined as what? And so your theoretical perspective and your theoretical knowledge and framework will shape your general definition of the central phenomenon. So there are infinite ways you could define it, right? Depend upon your theoretical framework. What would come to mind for me, given what I showed you in those sociological YouTube clips that I used to show in the class, might be the challenges confronting the South Korean tattoo artists will be generally defined as social deviance as a profession, social deviance as a profession in the fashion industry. Yeah, I like that. Social deviance, you know, because so much of what is cool is like doing something that's like technically wrong. Like, oh, you cut your hair. Oh, you let your hair go long. You have a long hairstyle. Wow, you're kind of a rebel. That's cool, man. I mean, this is a topic that's interesting to me that I've been working on. Like, how do market mechanisms work within the framework of the state to control and channel social deviance into forms of social creativity, and then through the commodification process to produce social mobility? So how do you commodify social deviance to make it a source of income or a source of business? You see this right now, for example, in regard to the United States regarding the legalization of marijuana, cannabis. That was a crime. You used to be, when I was your age, if you're caught with a lot of marijuana, you go to jail for a long time. It was a felony. Now we're starting to see the legalization of marijuana. And why was it illegal? What is the legalization process? You also have to know something about how marijuana was associated with Hispanic people. That marijuana was associated with the other, the people that were perceived as a racial threat, that were non-white, Hispanics, Mexicans. Marijuana is a Spanish word. So somehow it was associated with xenophobia and settler colonialism, that you're going to go in and you're going to take this territory where people are living there that are indigenous people, Mexican people. The United States took much of Mexico in the middle of the 19th century, half of it. America conquered half of Mexican territory in the mid 19th century. And now it's becoming a big business with potentially many billions of dollars at stake. So that's an excellent example of social deviance through commodification of that process. And of course, there's an entire culture that emerges around that. Hip hop culture, Snoop Dogg, right? You know Snoop Dogg. He makes all these songs about smoking weed. There's a music culture, there's a dress culture, fashion culture, a music fashion culture, a dress fashion culture that all associates with this. And then of course, businesses are all, and all sorts of other businesses will emerge around that. So, but there you can see, I talked about xenophobia, I talked about settler colonialism, I talked about racism, I talked about nationalism. So there's a framework in my head that's guiding my thinking in some direction in this regard. So somehow it's an act of defiance to get a tattoo in Korea. It's not as dangerous as, some other forms of defiance, social deviance, but it's also kind of acceptable. There's this defiance against the older generations. What is the Japanese element? I mean, that's what came to mind when we look at this project. We look at this case of South Korea. We all know this report on South Korea comes out, 2 weeks after the New York Times report on tattooing in Japan. Is that a coincidence? Or is it basically reflect some kind of assumption that basically there's something similar going on? How much do the Koreans who get tattoos, how do they respond to the association of tattooing with Japanese hegemony? I mean, they said in the article that tattooing was associated with Japanese gangster culture. Is that where they got, how does a South Korean tattoo artist respond to that? What do you like? People can become sensitive, right? Because their nationalism and patriotism is questioned. Are you acting like you're somehow glorifying Japanese culture? And they say, no, we don't do Japanese style tattoos. We don't do dragons, and we do other things. That's interesting. Deok, what would you do? How would you answer this?
Could you check the volume, please? Okay. Our group's purpose, our group's methodology would be ethnographic.
Ethnographic?
Way. Yeah. Okay. And we will cover the tattoo artists.
The subculture of the tattoo artists themselves. Yeah.
Yes, tattoo artists.
Uh-huh.
So how they struggle to legalize tattoo. Uh-huh. And the space would be tattoo artists union, their demonstration against Korean assembly or Korean government. Uh-huh. So in this research, I want to research on how they struggle and how they have connection with Korean politicians who want to change this role.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting. All sorts of interesting questions. Somehow implying or indicating that this tattoo phenomenon is somehow associated with sociological change and some kind of relationship to politics, some kind of political change. And, you know, and once you start talking about political change again, then you start talking about the criticisms of dissenters as somehow undermining the competition with North Korea. You know, I can, because North Korea is always claiming that South Korea is degenerate and backward, and that North Korea is, of course, the true font and representative of the Korean nation and the Korean spirit and the Korean culture. And so this is always something to which there's some degree of sensitivity in South Korea that, of course, you know, that North Korea is claiming they're better than South Korea because it's not decadent and degenerate like the South Koreans now copying America's. Are they copying American tattoo culture? Are they again copying America? You know, because as I said, these tattoo cultures everywhere in the United States. And, you know, I have to say myself, I'm as an old man, you know, I just don't really have a high appreciation for the personal aesthetic qualities of these tattoos. But the kind of people that get involved in tattoo parlors, they tend to be people that are, in the sociological term in the United States, sociologically deviant. They're people that somehow are rejecting the mainstream, and I don't know, they're rejecting it because they feel that they can't compete. And so if you get like all these tattoos and you get it on your face, even, you're telling yourself in the world, I'm happy because I reject all of the norms of proper and improper behavior around me. So I'm not even going to try to compete. I'm not going to compete with you. I'm not going to compete with you. I'm not going to compete. I am me, and I am happy to be me. And I remind myself that I am me, and I'm not going to compete with you. So I'm not going to get anxiety ridden. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to get sad. I'm not going to, because we're not in competing. I got a tattoo on my face, buddy. I'm different from you. No doubt about it. And it's permanent unless I get it removed, which is really hard to do. What's going on with that? I mean, I've always wondered, you know, about why do people get all these tattoos? What's going on? I mean, why do you want to do that? I mean, tattoos have been in the news again recently because as the Russian army invades Ukraine and they arrest men, they make the men take off their clothes because they're looking for tattoos on the Ukrainian men to see if they have tattoos, because the tattoos indicate that they were in the Ukrainian military. And if they see that, they'll kill you. And that's been a tradition forever in the United States as well. If you join the US Army forever, they always get a tattoo. And it was a military thing. Even in the United States, everybody went in the military, like during World War II, even when they got drafted, they got a tattoo. But then after the war, and this tattoo thing, that really took off. It must have been 40, 50 years ago, it began in the US. And, you know, it's just interesting to figure out what is its significance? What does it mean for the rest of society? What is it indicating? Okay, so back to the notes here. Cresswell and Poth also suggest, I think you can see this, share screen. Ah, and so even if it's hidden, what about, can he be a teacher? No, that's interesting. That's interesting. I don't know what I mean. And essentially you have to compare, like, is it also illegal to get a tattoo in the United States if you're a police officer? I don't know. I could probably find out by just typing it into Google. Can a US police officer have tattoos? And they'll probably say, yeah, just they can't be seen. They can't be, like, you can join the US Army, but you're not allowed to have tattoos that people can see. They have to be covered up. So Cresswell and Poth also suggest including a general definition for the central phenomenon in the problem statement. This general definition is a tentative preliminary definition that the researcher intends to use at the outset of the study. Determining the definition with any specificity may be difficult in advance. However, for example, in a narrative study, the researcher might define the types of stories to be collected. That is, for example, the life stages of the interviewee, the person you're interviewing, their childhood memories, the transition from adolescence to adulthood, attendance at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. It's infinite, right? The family drama enacting the aftermath of a death of a sibling. And so you could say, well, the personal decision process and journey of a college student to participate in a study abroad program to go to the Catholic University of Korea might be one example of a personal story. How did that person come to be here? In a phenomenology, the writer researcher clearly specifies the central phenomenon to be the focus of research. For example, the meaning of grief. And as I said, just reading the New York Times, this has been a big topic in the New York Times with the COVID-19 pandemic. Grief over the loss of your family, of course, if they die, but grief over loss of holidays together, grief over job transitions, grief, lots of sacrifices that you didn't want to make. A major topic of discussion in elite media today is grief over various kinds of losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The meaning of anger, even the meaning of chess playing, right? In grounded theory, the researcher or writer might identify the central phenomenon as a concept that is central to the process that the researcher examines. So, for example, the effect on past relationships, no, that's not on, of, got to go back to fix that. The effect of past relationships on post-remarried couples. So people, like, I often think about this, right? People, they get married and one of their spouse dies, and then they get remarried. And you read about this all the time in obituaries and reports in the news. How does a person, after they lose their husband or wife after 10, 20, 30 years and they get remarried, how does their previous relationship affect their new relationship with the new person that they've married? In an ethnography, the researcher writer might identify the key cultural concepts that the research project is examining. And so this typically comes from anthropology. The key cultural concepts are often drawn from cultural concepts in anthropology, such as roles, behaviors, acculturation, how people are socialized into the subculture, communication, myths, stories, or other concepts which the researcher plans to take into the field at the beginning of the study. In an intrinsic case study, the researcher might define the boundaries of the case. That is, the writer specifies how the researcher bounds the case in time and space. So you have to identify the case. Like if you're going to talk about how did CUK deal with the pandemic? So you have to define when the pandemic began and then when the pandemic officially ended. Sometimes it's easy. You can say when the Korean government declared that there's a pandemic, or when the World Health Organization declared there's a pandemic. I don't know if the World Health Organization is ever going to declare an end to the pandemic, but we're changing here at South Korea now, right? Everybody is invited back to class. We still got to wear these masks, but we don't have to do much beyond wearing these masks. So sometimes defining the boundaries of the case in time and space is easy. Sometimes it takes some creativity, depending on what you're studying. So the researcher writer has to just explain and justify identifying and utilizing these boundaries. If the researcher is examining an instrumental case study, then the researcher might specify and define the issue which the researcher is examining in the case. So below are several examples illustrating the encoding and foreshadowing of the 5 approaches to qualitative research. So in narrative, these are the words you use in your purpose statement to encode, like this is a narrative study, or this is a phenomenology. You're going to have stories. You're going to use words like stories, epiphanies, lived experiences in chronology. Phenomenology is describe, meaning, essence, grounded theory, generate, develop, process, and so on. Ethnography means culture, right? Studying cultural sharing group, cultural behavior and language, cultural portrait, cultural themes, case study, bounded, single or collective case, event, process, program, individual. These are the kind of words that these 5 different approaches use. Notice how the lived experiences are emphasized in each of the following examples, since you're doing a narrative research purpose statement. A single individual in the life history of the individual. The author describes and analyzes the process of eliciting the life history of a man with mental retardation. And example B, the family and friends of a crash victim and the reactions of these individuals. The story I tell here describes the aftermath of the crash as my family and friends in Lurari, the town where I was born and where Rex lived, react to and cope with this unanticipated tragedy. Yeah, this is just set up for pandemic research, these kind of narrative research projects. I should tell you, I mean, there's, at least in the American media, there's all these warning signs that there are some serious stresses and strains in American society that somehow are tied up with the pandemic. There's been a big increase in mental health illness among young people. Big increase. There's been an increase in suicides. There's been an increase in gun violence. Somehow the stresses and strains of the pandemic are really having impacts that you want to understand through different methods, including qualitative research. Particularly, for example, as it relates to trying to get students to come back to school. I mean, a lot of these students that were going to school in some of these big cities in particular were really, it was difficult to keep them in school. And a lot of them just dropped out when they had to go online through Zoom with a computer. These poor students from very poor families didn't have any money. They didn't have a computer. They never really used computers. Now they have to go on. And so they've just disappeared from the class. That's a big problem. And so to get some answers, you need the information. And that's where you use qualitative research to gather information. And an example of a phenomenological research purpose statement. Again, I include that here because this is typically the kind of thing you would do for a thesis in master's, a master's school thesis or PhD thesis would be more like a phenomenology. You wouldn't do a narrative. The role of a group of individuals as fathers. The present study, for example, the present study was designed to explore the beliefs, attitudes, and needs that current and expectant adolescent fathers, so teenage fathers, and young men who are fathers of children born to adolescent mothers have regarding their role as a father. You know, that's a big problem. Or is it a problem? It's a big topic in the US. As I told you, it was a big concern about the extent of teenage pregnancy in the United States, and it was going down before the pandemic, and I don't know if it's gone back up. And these are often sensitive questions because there's often an element of racism to them, that this is a particular problem among Black people. Is it a problem? Why is it a problem? Who said it's a problem? It's a problem if you're a traditional American white family. Yeah, that's because you don't live like the way we white people. And there's all these judgmental elements to it. Very sensitive, emotional, angry topics. Like it's because these, a white supremacist would say, well, it's because these people are uncivilized. And we're supposed to become like them? No, they're supposed to become like us. And how do we make them like us? Well, that's up to them to choose how to be. But if they become like us, we love them. We're not racist. We love Ben Carson. We love Clarence Thomas. They can point to Black Republicans that say, we're not racist. We love these people. They're Black because they think and act in the right way. You just got to think and act in the right American way, and we will love you. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. The meaning of individuals attributed to healthcare is experience. The purpose of our phenomenological study was to explore what meaning people with liver failure ascribed to the experience of waiting for a transplant at a major Midwestern transplant center. And again, that's really sensitive topic. Your liver could be damaged because you drink too much. Alcoholics can destroy their liver. Should people who are alcoholics be allowed to receive one of the very few available transplants available? That's been a topic I've seen in the media. Like, how do doctors ethically make a decision on who gets the liver transplant and who does not? Does somebody who destroyed the liver through alcohol abuse have a right to the liver over somebody who has a disease, some other disease that doesn't have to do with alcohol abuse? How do those people explain? You know, if you're an alcoholic and you needed a liver transplant, do you think you should have the right to a liver transplant over somebody else? Oh, these are all very sensitive, emotional topics. Leadership. This is kind of interesting. The purpose of this study was to, in a grounded theory research project, the purpose of this study was to understand the processes a person experiences in creating a leadership identity. You know, those of you in the military, I mean, U.S. military is all volunteer, right? But they're always talking about leadership, 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 including in business schools. Business leadership. What is this leadership? I still don't know what it is. How do you become a leader? So this person is studying a leadership, how people create a leadership identity. I mean, I still think about people that I knew in my life who are charismatic. They were charismatic professionally and they're charismatic socially. And you know what? They were born that way. There's something about their genetic material and their upbringing that made them that way. That's been my experience. Resilience, that's a big topic these days. I just realized that resilience is a word that I think is a euphemism for redundancies. We're all supposed to be resilient today. Develop resilient systems, resilience to the pandemic, be resilient in responding to climate change. What they mean is create redundancies so that if something fails, you have a backup to step in and fill in the gap. So that means, for example, you have to have agricultural production capability in a country because you could have a war in Ukraine and Russia, shut off 1/3 of the world's export supplies for wheat to the rest of the world. How are you going to feed your people in Korea? How are you going to feed your people in Cambodia? How are you going to feed your people in India? You have to be resilient. And that means redundancies. Make sure you have enough rice farmers or wheat farmers in your country that stay in business. So in case disasters happen in Ukraine and Russia, you are resilient. And I just realized this morning, you know what they're saying? Redundancies, redundancy, redundancy. And economists don't like redundancies. It's wasteful. It's inefficient. We should have a global free market. And Canada and America, since they're the cheapest, most efficient farmers, they should concentrate on farming. And you South Koreans should give up all of your farming and do something else because you can never grow food as cheaply and as efficiently as America. And what do you say? Go jump in a lake because there could be a war with China and they blockade the Pacific Ocean and we can't get food from US. Or Russia invades Ukraine, blocks off 1/3 of the world's exports supplies of wheat in the world. And now what are we going to do in Africa? We're talking about millions of people may starve to death. Egypt is the biggest wheat importer in the whole world. So resilience, and everybody's not resilience. And I just realized that means redundancies. But resilience sounds better because economists don't like redundancies because they're not maximizing efficiency. They're more maximizing national security, food security, military security for the nation. So resilience development by a group of women in an isolated setting. The purpose of this study was to explore how women maintain their health in geographical, social, political, and economic and historical contexts. And so it means the theory that these women display through their actions and behavior to be resilient. And you have to describe it. Sometimes you use schematic representation, like you make figures and tables to explain the theoretical framework that these women functionally develop in how they maintain their health, their well-being in their context. Ethnographic research purpose statements. I'm gonna have to shut down this computer because I need to save this file. So let me shut this down and open up my laptop.